Decisions, Chapter 8. And we're going to talk about what kinds of flows we're going to use. We're going to use real cash flows, not accounting numbers. Remember back to when I asked if an average accounting return used real cash flows, the answer is no. Accounting numbers are not real cash flows because they have things like non-cash expenses like depreciation and deferred taxes. And so we know that that's a situation where they aren't matching up. We also know that there are accounts payable in there that they've got cash that hasn't been paid. Accounts receivable is cash that's yet to be received. So there's all sorts of things that net income has in it that do not represent real cash. So we have to be very careful about that. What we're going to end up doing most likely is backing into the real numbers if we are given accounting numbers. We only want to consider things that are incremental to the project. What does incremental mean? It means a cash flow that is going to change as a result of accepting the project. It's a cash flow that's going to change as a result of making the investment. We call those incremental cash flows. If you've got a cash flow that's going to recur regardless of the decision, we do not include them. It used to drive me nuts working with accountants, and I'd be pitching a new project, and they say, well, you know, your project also has to cover the overhead. And I'd say, oh my goodness, are we not covering the overhead now? They'd say, well, yeah. I'm like, well, then why does this project have to carry the overhead on its back? Well, it just does. It wouldn't be fair, right? Wrong. We're paying that stuff. What we're looking at is going beyond. That's why it's incremental. What we're doing beyond this. So we're not going to consider our total taxes. We're going to consider our incremental taxes. We're not going to consider our total revenues of the firm. We're going to consider only the additional revenues as a result of the project. So those are incremental. We also have to ask ourselves, if we didn't do this project, what could we do? Because those cash flows are also incremental to the firm, and I'll give you some examples on that. So in the end, you got to ask yourself, will my decision on the project have an impact on this cash flow? And if the answer is yes, then we have to include that increment. That's why it's called an incremental cash flow. Any questions? Okay. So let's talk about sunk costs. I had a class where I was discussing this and I had them write an essay answer. And one of the students referred to this as a suck cost. It is not suck, it is sunk. Okay, now, what's a sunk cost? It's money that's already been spent or we are already obligated to spend. And we can't get it back regardless of the decision that we make on the project. So, for example, raise your hand if you have student debt. Okay, most of you, right? Now, if you are offered two jobs when you come out of here, and they both pay, let's say they both pay $60,000 per year. One of them is in your field and will utilize this magnificent education that you have received here and that you now owe money on. The other one is with the carnival, which you have always dreamed of being a carny, right? And so you're like, how do I choose? Should your student debt or even the time that you put into this degree determine the decision you make? No. Remember, they both pay $60,000. One of them is going to put you in an office under these lights for the rest of your life. And one of them is going to put you on the, what do they call it, the midway? Yeah. Which one would you take? You don't let these past decisions that you can't change regardless change your future. There's a line out of Shakespeare I'm not an English lit guy, my mom is. But it's this. It says, what's done is done and cannot be undone. It's a sunk cost, right? You may have also heard there's no sense crying over spilled milk. Does it do us any good to cry over spilled milk? No. I was always glad to spill my milk because it meant I didn't have to drink it, right? If mom wasn't clever enough to refill my glass. Okay, so these are sunk costs. We do not include them in our analysis because no matter what decision we make, we have still paid them or we're still obligated to pay them. By the way, if you guys choose to go to the carnival, are you still obligated to pay your student loan debt? Absolutely. Okay, so what kind of sunk costs do we see? Well, the number one cost that finance people like to talk about is the marketing survey. Now, I've got, let's see, Ms. Guess, Ms. Flowers, any other marketing people in here? Okay, I'm going to pick on Ms. Herdman. Actually, no, I'm going to allow you to share your expertise here. I need to figure out, so I own a dairy, and my dairy produces just that plain old boring white milk right now. And I'm thinking about doing chocolate milk. Now, you guys know that everybody loves chocolate milk, or at least kids do. But here's the thing I need you to know. My herd, they're not cows, they're goats. Have you ever drank goat milk? No, probably not. Now, the big question, now we do know that there are certain people who enjoy it. You drank goat milk?
Yeah. It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. Do you think it would be better with a little chocolate in it?
No.
No, okay. So you can go and write that down, one no. So how are we going to find out whether people will drink chocolate goat milk? Ms. Herdman. Ask them. Now, can you just ask it? Or what do you need to do? Ms. Gaines.
You need to find a sample.
Oh, very good. I'm gonna do a pilot run of my goat milk, and then you're gonna do what? Mr. Zach, you said you're also a marketing guy. What are you gonna do next?
I mean, look at the sample and see if people like it or not.
Okay, you don't just look at it.
I mean, like, yeah.
You gotta take it somewhere, right? You gotta take it where the people are. Used to it would have been a shopping mall, but now shopping malls are largely deserted. So you gotta find somewhere else where the people are, right? Okay, so then you set up your little thing, and you got your blind taste test between cow milk and goat milk, and you come up with the answer, whether or not people like goat milk. Now, here's what you need to know. And keep in mind, my industry experience is going on 20 years old. Actually, it's more than that now. Every marketing study that I ever dealt with was $250,000. And that's just like the magical number for whatever reason. Now, $250,000 is on the line here. If I tell, now you look way too honest. I'm going to ask Mr. Zach. Mr. Zach, if I tell you that I'm going to give you $250,000 if the answer is kids like chocolate goat milk, and I'm going to give you 0 if the answer is they don't. Knowing that you're the kind of morally flexible marketing person that can convince a 15-year-old boy that Axe body spray will get you lucky with ladies, what are you going to tell me?
Kids like the milk.
Kids like the milk! Now, what does that mean? It means if I want an honest answer out of Mr. Zach, I've got to promise to pay him regardless of what that answer is. Right? This is why marketing studies are a sunk cost. If I decide, so if Mr. Zach comes to me and tells me that kids like chocolate goat milk, which Mr. Bohm says is unlikely, but if he tells me that and then I decide to start doing an NPV on the project itself, do I include that $250,000 that I gave to Mr. Zach? No, because I can't get it back regardless. Does that make sense? You do look way too honest to be in marketing. You should probably think of another line. Okay. Now, environmental impact studies. Let's say that you are planning to build a convenience store in California. In California, if you're going to build a convenience store, you have to talk to at least 3 experts. Now, I may be exaggerating here. It may be more like 5. But you got to talk to at least 3 experts. Number 1, you've got to talk to some sort of hydrologist. to see if the rainwater that flows away from your location is going to impact any sensitive aqua habitats or whatever, right? So, you know, when you're filling your gas tank and you pull the nozzle out, what almost always happens? A little drip, and then the rain comes, gasoline's lighter than water, so it goes along on the top, makes a beautiful shimmer. But if it gets in with the fish, it could be a problem, right? So you got to have some sort of hydrologist to look at it and say, no, not going to be a problem. Number two, we have to have an archaeologist or an anthropologist come in and make sure that there aren't any Native American or Mesoamerican or any other kind of artifacts that are buried there that might be of historical significance or of cultural significance to any group of people. Number three, we have to, let's see, who have I been through so far? The hydrologist, the archaeologist. Yeah, so, you know, I know I've got one more here. Probably an environmental impact, you know, some other variety. Okay, now, each one of those people are professionals. Do you think they expect to be paid for their time? Absolutely. And so they're each asking me $10,000. And so the, oh, I know, it was the endangered species people. Yeah, you got to talk to the endangered species people and make sure that this isn't the sole nesting ground for the native three-toed sloth or whatever, right? Because, you know, if you build your service station there and that's the only where these things can breed, then you've extincted a species. So that's the third person you got to talk to. I'm going to pay each one of those people. Let's assume the species lady tells me it's all good. I pay her $10,000. And then the native people come in, or the archaeologist, anthropologist, and they say it's all good. There is nothing of value here at all. Pay them $10,000. The third person, the hydrologist, comes in and says, you can't do it because there is this endangered blah, 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 trout that lives in the downstream, and they've been shown to be very sensitive to gasoline in the water. You can't do it. Now, first of all, I've still got to pay the hydrologist, right? So now I've got 3 strikes against me, or I've got 1 strike against me. Is 1 strike enough to kill the deal? Yeah, 1 from any one of these 3 would kill me, right? And so I'm not going to do the project. But let's assume that they all come back okay. Now I can go ahead and do the project. Should I include the cost of the environmental surveys in my NPV analysis? No, that money's gone. There's nothing I can do to get it back, regardless of what I do. Does that make sense? Okay, so those are sunk costs. We do not include them in our analysis. Now let's talk about opportunity costs. Are there things you'd rather be doing right now? Oh yeah, I think we could all say that. I'd rather be at home playing with my dogs. You'd rather be back at the health department, fighting for truth, justice, and anti-COVID. And yeah, so there are things that we would rather be doing, but we have chosen to be here instead. Some people have actually given up money as far as salary to be here. So if you were paid by the hour and you're here instead of at work, guess what? You've got an opportunity cost. Should we include those sorts of things in our analysis? Yeah. So let me tell you about, by the way, you know I'm a big old nerd. My wife, she suggested that we become professors. Do you know what I did? I did an NPV analysis, right? And I looked at my expected pay as a professor, which, by the way, grows at about 2% a year. It's really slow. And then the pay that I was going to be giving up during the time that I went to college, plus, that's pay that I'm foregoing by not being there now. So what I'm looking at is the difference between my current salary and what I would have been making, right, to do my NPV analysis. That's a real opportunity cost. Now, here's the cool thing. When I calculated this thing out, NPV was roughly 0 for me. Why did I become a professor if my NPV was roughly 0? My wife, right? When I did it for my wife's situation, because she was working in a lower capacity. I was a mechanical engineer. She has an English degree, right? And so the NPV for her was huge. Now, when you put us both together, and I plan to keep her and she plans to keep me, then the project for both of us is positive NPV. So, did I include opportunity costs? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we need to look at, in our projects, we need to look at opportunity costs too. And so some of the favorite ones that we like to point out are the empty building. The empty building is totally paid for, and we're going to be making these property tax payments on it regardless. We're going to be doing the maintenance on the building regardless. And so we've got this empty building sitting there. And I'm going to use it in a project. A lot of people look at it and say, well, wait a minute. There are no incremental cash flows. Therefore, we don't even need to worry about the building. But the question is this: what could we do with the building if we didn't do our project in it? Ms. Hofstadter, what could we do with the building? You can sell it! You can sell it! Now, we need to figure out a number for that. Any idea how we're going to figure out the value of our building?
Call someone to appraise it.
Call someone to appraise it. That is usually what students say first, and it is a correct answer, but I'm cheap. Appraisers require money, right? So, who do I usually call instead? I'll call a commercial realtor. In fact, I do this with my houses. To figure out what they're worth before I put them on the market, I will call 3 realtors. By the way, 3 is the magic number. I call 3 realtors and I say, I am thinking about selling my house. Have I promised to sell my house? No. Number 2, I am interviewing realtors. Even if I decide to sell my house, are you guaranteed to get the job? No. Are you interested in making a proposal? What is the answer always? Yes. And so then the doorbell rings. It's a lady in a suit with way too much jewelry, way too much perfume. And she comes in and she sits at my kitchen table. And she has a binder that's like this thick. And the first 2/3 of the binder is all about how freaking great she is, right? What's that? Oh, I'm not going to name any names. But yeah. Okay. I'm not going to name any names. And she said that too lightly to be under on the microphone, so we're good. Okay, so she comes to the house. By the way, I've never talked to a realtor here like this. This is in other places. Okay, so actually I told that story one time, and this guy laughed. And I said, what's funny? He says, yeah, it's my mom. Okay, so the first part of the proposal is about how freaking great they are, how they were $1 million seller in 2011, they were a $2 million seller in 2012, blah, 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 blah. And then all this great stuff they're doing for the community, for disadvantaged goats, and goats are the animal for the lecture today. And then they'll eventually get to comparable sales in my neighborhood. Now I tune in, right? And what they do is they go through and they point out the other sales that have happened in your neighborhood, and they talk about how those houses are similar to yours and how they're different and what kind of adjustments you'd have to do to make these comparable to your house. For instance, if they have a swimming pool, do you think they sell for more or less? Instinct says more because swimming pools cost money. Correct answer? Less. Why do you, first of all, have you ever had a swimming pool or lived at a house that had one? It's what?
Annoying to maintain.
It's annoying to maintain. And it's not only annoying, it's expensive, right? Present value, future cash flows, that's a negative. Especially if you're really fat, white and pasty. Like, I won't say fat, but you know, I've got blubber on me. I don't want to lay outside, right? I come in looking like a lobster. The neighbors would laugh at me. It's a bad deal. So I don't want a swimming pool. And so if I'm looking at 2 otherwise identical houses and one of them's got a pool, I'm going to put a discount on that house. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, back to the story. She's going to go through all these things, and then here's the magic that I've been waiting for. And we think your house is worth, boop, And she throws out the number. I do this 3 times. And I get all 3 numbers. Let's say that the numbers are 385, 375, and 425. 385, 375, and 425. What should I do?
Take the average.
You could take the average. Let me make it more clear. One of them's 455. Yeah, you toss that. Now, why is the realtor telling you 455? She wants the deal, and she knows that people are greedy, right? And you're like, wow, she can get me 455. These other people are only going to get me an average of 380. What's going to happen? You're going to put your house on the market. It's going to sit, it's going to sit, it's going to sit, it's going to sit. And at the end of her first 90-day contract, she'll come to you and she's like, well, the market's not as good as we thought, so we probably need to lower the price on your house. What do you think she's going to suggest we lower it to? 380, right? What did she do? She used your greed to make sure she captured the commission. She's just going to get it 90 days later than she would have otherwise. Does that make sense? By the way, are all realtors women? Of course not. Are the ones that I've dealt with? Yeah, it's mixed. Anyway, back to the story. But for this story, they were all female. Questions? So what number should I use? 375 plus 385 divided by 2 is 380. That's the number I would use. And then, of course, I would have to subtract any sort of taxes and transaction fees, right? Because realtors don't work for free. Because if a realtor's going to sell this thing, I'm going to have to pay them a commission. By the way, is this dishonest on my part? Absolutely not. If I decide not to do the project, what might I decide to do with the building? Miss Offsetter? Sell it, right? And if I'm going to sell it, who am I going to get to do the selling? One of the 3 people I talked to, right? I haven't been dishonest. I told her we were thinking about selling, and I told them that we were interviewing realtors. So I haven't given them any false promises. Questions? Okay. Every factory that I've ever worked in had an old machine that used to be used in production, but is now not. And it's over in the corner, and it's got a tarp over it. And this was one of the things that I like to do when I would get a job at a new factory, is I would go to the back corner, and I would lift up the tarp to see what sort of magical device lived underneath it. Now, let's assume then that we have a new project, and someone says, hey, wait a minute. You know that reamer that's in the back corner? We could use that in this project. Someone else says, yeah, and since it's something we already own, it's not even going to cost us anything. We shouldn't put any numbers for it in the capital budgeting project. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? It's a bad idea. What could we do with the machine if we don't do the project?
Sell it.
We could sell it. Now, how do I find out how much the machine is worth? Well, I could always go out to the internet and look for a machine of similar quality. I probably take about 80% of that value because I'm going to sell to a dealer and they're going to turn around and get a markup. So if it's $50,000, I would say it's worth $40,000. But that's my number. That's my number for the value of that machine, because I could sell it if I didn't do the project. Does that make sense? Okay, so we always include these opportunity costs in our analysis. By the way, my slides used to say in your analysis, but then when I said it in the lecture, it sounded like your analysis, which is like when they check your pee for dope. Anyway, so now let's talk about side effects. Have you seen these commercials on televisions for pharmaceutical things? And they say, and you know, it's interesting that there's small font size in those ads, just with a voice. Side effects may include drowsiness, dry mouth, constipation, They list off all these things. By the way, are any of those side effects typically things that you want? No. Should you consider the side effects before taking a drug? Absolutely. And we're going to see the same thing is true with financial side effects. The financial side effects are what is this current project going to do to the cash flows in our other businesses? And we definitely need to consider those because they are incremental to the project. And there's a couple that we need to think about. The happy one. Let's start with the happy one. Synergy is when a project causes a cash flow increase in another project or product line. So this example is strangely about 20 years old now. But iTunes first came out. By the way, before iTunes, how did we download our music? Ms. Rafael? Was it legal?
No.
No. Did people do it anyway? Yes. So we had a whole nation of criminals, right? Okay, so then Steve Jobs comes along and says, people will pay for music. And I laughed. I said, why would anyone pay for music when you can download it for free? And then they busted a bunch of students and sent them to prison. Well, anyway, on with the story. And it makes sense. I bet Steve Jobs dropped a dime on him. Back to the story. iTunes by itself, positive NPV project. Now, the problem in the beginning, though, is you could only download the music to your machine, and it had to be a Mac, and you could only listen to the music at your machine. And so if you wanted to take your tunes with you, you had to carry your laptop with you, and you look like a total nerd. So nobody wanted to do that. So there was limited amount of appeal to iTunes in the beginning. But then Steve Jobs came up with this thing called the iPod, and it allows you to take your music with you. And they did some commercials of some incredibly hip-looking people who are dancing with their iPod, and everybody says, "Shoo, I gotta have one of them." Now, here's the trick. Maybe beforehand you weren't the kind of person that would carry your computer around with you, or you wouldn't sit at your computer and listen to music. But now that you can get the iPod, would you be more likely to buy songs at iTunes? Yeah, and so it increased the cash flows at iTunes. And so when they were doing the iPod project, which was undoubtedly positive NPV by itself because they were charging $600 for $150 worth of parts, that's positive NPV, but they should also include what kind of growth do we expect in our iTunes business when this goes down. Now, and we could go on with some other synergy things here, but let's talk about the other one, erosion or cannibalism. Erosion or cannibalism. By the way, erosion is the force of its wind and water against rock. It wears it away. It's how the Grand Canyon was made, which, by the way, if you haven't been to the Grand Canyon, don't go. It's just a big hole. So erosion wears these things away, and that's what's going on here. And the new project is wearing away the cash flows of your old projects. That's why we call it erosion. The other thing we might call it is cannibalism. What's a cannibal? Something that eats something, but what's the relationship between those two things? Yeah, they're the same. People usually think that only humans are cannibals, and there are cannibalistic humans, but in truth, there are cannibalistic animals. Example, the chicken. Oh, someone knows. It's rare. Thank you. Okay, so here's the trick with chickens. If you've got a flock of chickens, and one of the chickens gets a cough, or a little speck of blood on it, the other chickens will peck it to death. And they will peck the flesh off its little chicken bones. Because the chicken is an evil animal with a dark heart. Which, whenever I'm having a Chick-fil-A sandwich, I never feel bad. You should never feel bad about eating a chicken because they're evil. Okay, on with the story. Chickens are cannibals. So, why do we talk about these projects being cannibalistic? Because they're eating their own kind, right? Okay, so let's talk about, and boy, you can tell my example's getting kind of old here. The introduction of the iPhone 6s, it cost some sales of the iPad mini. In fact, let's go through this whole thing. When the iPhone gets introduced, now, so by the way, do you think I owned an iPod? Mm-hmm. Hell no, I'm not that cool. Okay, so, but then I get the iPhone because it's a computer you can hold in your hand, right? Because I'm a big old geek. So I got the computer, hold it in my hand, and I'm playing around with it, and I tell my wife, hey, wow, this thing has an iPod built into it. Now, what do you think the next thing is that I did?
Bought stuff on iTunes.
Yeah, I went and bought stuff on iTunes, and so it would be synergistic to iTunes, the iPhone, but what if you were about to buy an iPod and then you figure out that the iPhone has the same thing? Does that make sense? You're like, maybe I'll just skip the iPod, go straight to the iPhone. And so it would cannibalize sales of the iPod. By the way, sure enough, I went out to iTunes and all my favorite songs from the 80s were right there, 99 cents a piece, right? Because that was back before they started jacking the prices on iTunes. Okay, so those we see both erosion and cannibalism. Any questions? Let's see, there was another story in there. What about the introduction of so there's the full-size iPad. And I get the first, or the second, never buy the first of anything that Apple makes. I bought the second iPad, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, my mom would really enjoy this to look at Facebook and stuff, but it's like $500. And I'm like, yeah, I love her, but And then they come out with the iPad mini. So I've already decided I'm going to buy her one for Christmas, and then they come out with the iPad mini. It's only $350. What do you think Mom got for Christmas? The iPad mini. It's easier for her to hold in her old hands. Right? Then she saw mine. She's like, I want one of those. And you know how the story ends, right? Yeah, I bought it for her. Okay, so what's the point of this? The iPad mini ate into the sales of the big iPad. And so that's another story of cannibalism. Now, what about the Apple Watch? Is there a cannibalism story to be told? No. Is anyone going to buy one of these to listen to their tunes or buy one of these to make phone calls? No. But what do you have to have in order to make one of these work? I'm going to ask a fellow Apple Watch wearer here, what do you have to make one of those work? You don't know? Do you have an Android phone? No.
Well, you have to have an iPhone.
Yeah, you have to have an iPhone, right? And so it might have actually, in fact, I know it did boost sales of iPhones because there were people who were on Android that said, I want that Apple Watch, but it really sucks because they don't have an iPhone, so then they made the switch. Questions? Okay. We're going to get into this Baldwin Company example, but before we do, I want to talk to you about some equations. What we're going to try to do here is we're going to do an NPV analysis, and the cash flows that we are going to discount are called the cash flow from assets. Cash flows from assets, CFFA, cash flows from assets. And we know the cash flows from assets, if you paid any attention to chapter 2, it's operating cash flow minus the change in net working capital minus net capital spending. So CFFA stands for cash flow from assets. What does OCS stand for? Operating cash flow. And what does NWC stand for? Net working capital. And NCS? Very good. Now, how do I calculate net working capital? Oh, this is like the... Thank you, Mr. Wong. Current assets minus current liabilities. Okay, and we'll get to net capital spending and how we handle that. Okay. Now, let's talk about an assumption with net working capital. We assume net working capital goes to 0 at the end of the project. Let's talk about why that would be. Let's assume we're doing a manufacturing project. When we start out, we are going to have more net working capital, which means that we're anticipating our current assets to go up there at the very beginning. Just name some current assets. Let's talk about what would happen to them. What's the first one that pops to your mind? Cash. Anytime you're taking on a new project, should you have additional cash on hand? Oh yeah. Every time my wife and I buy a new house, I assume it's going to cost me about $10,000 over and above all the other stuff. Usually ends up costing more like $15,000 over and above the other stuff because somehow the couch just doesn't go with this new house or something like that. So there's money that has to be spent. By the way, the only reason we have a civilization is because women have standards. I'll just say it right there because men live like animals, right? So I'd still have that box from my 1989 television eating frozen pizza off of it if it wasn't for my wife. So I'm not complaining. I'm just telling you this is what happens. Back to the story. You got to have money to get started there. So we got to have cash. What's another current asset? Inventory. So we're getting ready to manufacture stuff. We are going to have an increase in raw materials, which is part of our inventory. We're going to have an increase in WIP. What does WIP mean? Work in process, right? And then we are going to have an increase in our finished goods inventory too. So inventory is going to go up across the board. So we're looking at an increase in current assets. We're looking at an increase in inventory. Another current asset would be accounts receivable. If we're selling something new on credit, we're definitely going to have an increase in accounts receivable. And but we're going to have an increase in accounts payable. But of course, hopefully, that's current liability. Hopefully our accounts receivable would be greater than the accounts payable because otherwise, basically what we're saying is we're selling stuff for less than we're buying it. We don't want to do that. Okay, now throughout the whole process, we've got this extra net working capital, but at the very end, what can I do? I throw the rest of the raw material into the machine, shoot out whatever the product is, and then I sell that product, get accounts receivable, I collect the accounts receivable, and now I've got cash. And then all the cash that I have at the very end goes back to the mother company from which it came. That's why we assume at the end of the project, net working capital is equal to 0, because all that goes back to the mother company. Questions? Okay, so last time we were talking about the formulas are going to be necessary for us to do this net present value analysis of the Baldwin Company project, which I'll hand that to you here very shortly. And we said this top line gives us CFFA. What does that stand for? Very good, cash flow from assets. And what is OCF? Operating cash flow. And what is NCS? Net capital spending. And what is NWC? Oh wow, she is on fire. Okay, so we said that with the net working capital, it's current assets minus current liability, and we're going to assume that it goes to 0 in the last period of the project, and we explain why that is. And then something else, I need to give you the formula for operating cash flow. Oh, I may have done this last time. OCF is equal to EBIT. What's EBIT stand for? Very good. Earnings before interest and taxes minus taxes plus depreciation. Does that look right? Does anybody know if that's right? I'm pretty sure that's right. Okay, now let's explain why we have to do that. EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes. The depreciation has already been subtracted out. Is depreciation a real cash flow? No. And we're trying to find operating cash flow. So we're going to have to add depreciation back. Now, we also know that this was before taxes, and we need to ask ourselves the question, are taxes a real cash flow? Oh yeah, they are. So we definitely have to subtract them. Now, there's one more thing there. We've covered the E, the B, and the T. What about the I? Why are we not doing anything with I for operating cash flow? Any ideas? It is a real cash flow, but is it an operating cash flow? And there's two reasons. Number one, and I know that accountants get confused about this, but it's not an operating cash flow. And the other thing, which is perhaps more important, is that we account for the costs of financing our project in a different way. What do you have to do net present value? What are your ingredients? Well, we got to have CFFA, but what else do we have to have?
Discount rate.
Yeah, the discount rate. And remember that discount rate is the one that we came up with based on the market's demanded return based on the risk of our project. And so that discount rate is how we are handling financing costs for our project. So write this down, we will never include a cash flow for interest or dividends in our project. We will never include a cash flow for interest or dividends in our project. Okay. Let's see what else we can look at up here. We've already talked about net working capital. We've talked about operating cash flow. Net capital spending sounds fairly easy. It's the money that you spend to acquire the machine or the building. And in period 0, that's absolutely correct. But at the end of the project, what could happen? What might we do with this machine when we're done with it? Sell it. And you might think it was as simple as, well, I could sell a machine for $30,000 and that will be my cash flow at the end. But it's not that simple. In fact, we have to come up with something called the after-tax salvage value, ATSV. And it is equal to the market value of whatever this thing is we're selling. In fact, in my little example I just gave there, it was $30,000 minus the tax rate times the market value minus the book value. Oh man, that looks like a pain. Let's discuss why it is the way it is. When we are, in fact, let's talk about how we get book value to help you understand this. And we've discussed this before here in class. Book value is equal to the historic cost minus the accumulated depreciation. Also known, let's see, book value at T plus 1 is equal to historical cost minus the accumulated depreciation at T plus 1 is equal to the book value at T minus the depreciation at S of P, T plus 1. And this is actually the one that I like to use because it works better in Excel. So prior period's book value minus this period's depreciation gives us this period's book value. And so the book value of these things are going to go down as time goes on simply because we're depreciating them. Now, here's the trick. Do you think that we will depreciate them exactly so that market value will exactly equal book value? It's highly unlikely. It's highly unlikely. It's about as unlikely as a bond selling at par, right? Because it just would have to be perfect for it to work out that way. And so we typically end up over depreciating the asset. And when we over depreciate the asset, that means the book value is less than the market value. So this thing is positive, and we end up having to pay some taxes. Let's talk about why that is. When I depreciate an asset, that depreciation reduces my taxable income, therefore reduces my taxes. So if I have over depreciated an asset, I have underpaid my taxes. Does that make sense? If I've over depreciated an asset, I have underpaid my taxes. And that means we're going to owe taxes at the end. On the other hand, a less likely scenario is that the book value is greater than the market value, in which case this thing's going to be negative, multiplied by the taxes, and with the negative there, what's a negative times a negative? Positive. And so this turns into a tax refund, because if you under depreciate the asset, you have overpaid your taxes. Now let's ask you this. And keep in mind, think as a business here, not as an individual. Would you rather underpay your taxes or overpay your taxes? Say again? Okay, so that's the individual in you speaking, because you know they're going to come after you with interest and penalties, right? So, of course, ideally what you do is squeak it at that level where you are underpaying, but only by enough that they don't hit you with interest or penalties. But when you're a business, there is no interest and penalty for over depreciating and underpaying your taxes. You're going to have exactly the same number of dollars of depreciation, and you're going to have the exact same number of dollars of taxes as you do this. But the question is, and I'm talking in total here, but when do you end up paying the taxes? And if you are under depreciating the asset, then you are paying the taxes sooner in time. If you are over depreciating the taxes, you pay the same number of dollars, but later. Which would you rather do?
Later.
Yeah, later, time value of money. If I say, pay me $5 now or $5 a year from now, what are you going to do?
A year.
Yeah, a year from now. Miss Flower says, whew, I won't even be around, so yeah, I'll take that $5 a year, or send it to you 5 years from now. Right. Question?
Who checks your depreciation? Like how are they going to catch your under depreciating or over depreciating?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, there's nothing to catch because it's not illegal. Right. Oh, okay. So it's not illegal. So what basically, companies have to file taxes like anyone else, and they are subject to audit like anyone else, right? And so the question is, how likely is the IRS to drop in on you? But in this case, no matter how you're doing it, you're going to be fine, as long as you're depreciating in accordance with the tax code. And we would rather, and we'll talk about this more here in a little bit, we would rather accelerate our depreciation and avoid those taxes in the early periods so that we end up paying them in the later periods when they're worth less. Questions? I used to have trouble convincing people that dollars out in the future would be worth less, but now that you people have encountered inflation on your own, right, you totally understand. My house, the money that I owe on it, my folks are always like, why don't you pay off your house? Why don't you pay off your house? And I'm like, no. I'm going to pay that off with the nearly worthless dollars that we'll have in the future. And it's the same thing with your taxes. Wouldn't you rather pay it off with less worthwhile dollars out in the future? I would. Good question. Other questions? Okay. Now, let's talk about the scenarios that lead to under and over depreciation. Typically, you end up with over depreciation. And I'll give you the example from my little operation from 97, 98. I had machines, and all of my machines were book value 0 because they were so old, they were fully depreciated. Yet I could have sold my least valuable machine for $50,000, so that would have been its market value. I could have sold my most valuable machine for around $300,000. And so these things have value even though they don't have book value. And so that's why this is the most usual scenario where your market value is bigger than your book value. But let me tell you a couple scenarios where it might be reversed. Number one, let's talk about the machines that make the chips that go into computers and things like that. Those things, they keep making the little connections on them smaller, which allows the chips to get smaller, and consume less energy and all sorts of good stuff, and then also make less heat. And so, but the problem is that your machine will still be running well when the next generation comes out. But as soon as the next generation comes out, your machine is now worth a lot less. And so you might actually have a book value that was greater than the market value for your machine. because your machine's obsolete. Does that make sense? It's kind of like you could buy a brand new internal combustion engine car in, say, the year 2034, and then the next year they outlaw internal combustion engines. And do you think or new cars with internal combustion engines, do you think anyone's going to want to buy your car? Probably not. Okay, now, here's the other example, and this is from my actual personal experience. We had a machinist who was machining magnesium. Magnesium is the metal that they put in fireworks to make them sparkle and burn bright when they explode. And as a result, when you're cutting magnesium, you have to be very careful not to start a fire. And so you have to be careful to keep things cool. Well, that doesn't always happen. So our protocol was to always have a bucket of sand by the machine. Why sand? Because the fire is so hot that water won't put it out. You have to douse it with, you have to like push the bucket of sand on it to smother it. Oh yeah. Okay, so dude's at his machine. Of course, it's the night shift. I told you about the night shift and why they don't necessarily live as long. Okay, so the night shift, and of course he's probably a little sleepy. He forgot to get the bucket of sand, and of course the thing catches fire. And so he runs to the bucket of sand, but by the time he comes back, this thing has burned so bright and so hot that the actual machine is just a pile of ash. What do you think the market value of that machine was? 0. The book value was something positive. And so that's the other situation where we find ourselves, where we've got a market value that is less than the book value. Questions? Yeah.
So you wouldn't adjust the book value at all, even though it kind of burned down?
Okay, so what we're going to do at that point is we are going to write the darn thing off, and it'll be the end of its life. And what we'll do then is we'll get 0 minus the taxes times 0 times negative book value. So what we're going to do is we will be able to reduce our taxes by book value times T. That's assuming you're making a profit somewhere else, right? Yeah, it goes off the books at that point, right? Because it's not worth anything. Other questions? Okay. I think. Oh no, don't die on me. Come on, wake up. Okay. So now I'm going to hand out the Baldwin Company example. And I want you guys to hold on to this and bring it back with you if we don't finish it today. That's my original. As always, I refuse to lick my fingers when I'm handing things out. I think that's nasty. And I hope you do too. Looks like we're only 4 people short today. That's great.
Oh, the other way around.
Okay. So what we have here is our example, and we won't read all this. But the Baldwin Company, they make balls, all sorts of balls, tennis balls, baseballs, footballs, blah blah blah. And they've identified another segment of the sports ball market that looks promising, and that market is for brightly colored bowling balls. If you, of course, you probably the only one in here that remembers back when bowling balls were just really drab colors. And then there would be that like one red one that would kind of, you're like, yeah, right? Okay, so now things have gotten better, I hear, in the bowling industry. But apparently there's this market for brightly colored bowling balls. And he believes that a large number of bowlers value appearance and style above performance. That's me. Okay, because I can't bowl for squat. You guys know what bowling is, right? Anybody not know what bowling is? Okay. He also believed it would be difficult for competitors to take advantage of the opportunity because of Baldwin's cost advantages and highly developed marketing skills. Okay, so in 2013, they investigated the market potential of brightly colored bowling balls, and of course, that test marketing cost $250,000. Now, I've got my marketing folks in here. Let's see, this question doesn't require any sort of dishonesty, so I can ask this hard person. If you were going to figure out whether people wanted brightly colored bowling balls, where would you go? The bowling alley. And what would you do? Show them your balls. Oh, I usually get a better laugh out of it. You show them your balls. And then, of course, when someone like Mr. Zach laughs, then I say, get your mind out of the gutter. Okay, those are all the lame bowling jokes for today, I promise. Okay. In any case, oh, and by the way, here's what you want to do when you're doing these sorts of things. As you see a number, you want to go ahead and put it in the spreadsheet. And of course, someone's going to ask, is this going to be on the exam? Well, this sort of thing can be on the exam, but can I have your Excel coding skills be on the exam? No. Okay. Marketing survey. And I'm going to, and I'm going to say, what is it, 250,000?
Yep.
And the question is, what kind of cost is that?
A sunk cost.
It's a sunk cost. Sunk cost. Do we include it or not?
No.
Do not include. I have to move very slow. Apparently I'm too fast today. It's not like I drank any more coffee than usual. I don't get it. Okay. So let's see what else we got here. In any case, the Baldwin Company is now considering investing in a machine to produce bowling balls. The bowling balls would be manufactured in a building owned by the firm and located near Los Angeles. The building, which is vacant, and the land can be sold for $150,000 after taxes. So here we go. Building 150, 123. What kind of cost is the building? Yeah, it's an opportunity cost. Should we include it?
Yes.
Yeah. Working with his staff, blah, blah, blah. He summarizes his assumptions as follows. The cost of the bowling ball machine is $100,000. Bowling ball machine, year 0, 100. And of course we know we're going to include that. And he says it has an estimated market value at the end of 5 years of $30,000. So that's going to be this market value that we were talking about right here. And so I'm going to say BB machine year 5. And we're going to say 30, 1, 2, 3. Okay. And keep in mind, the reason that I'm putting all this stuff, I'm going to put as much as I possibly can in the upper left-hand corner. And that's because what I'm going to be able to do then is if one of these numbers might change on me, I can go in and I change it in the upper left-hand corner, and I'm going to have everything else down below linked. And so that way, when I change the number up here, everything down here changes. I'll see a lot of rookies with Excel, and they'll actually go ahead and type in the numbers down below, or just a few of the numbers, and they make the rest of them like they should be, where they're linked. We want everything that is in the spreadsheet itself to be linked to the original data cell, and that way we're going to be able to do what's called what-if analysis. What if the machine costs more? What if it's not as worth as much at the end as we thought? And so that's why it's very important to put this stuff all up here, and then we're going to link to these cells as we move along. Okay, now so far everything we've been given is beginning, or it's a single year, but now we're given production by the 5-year life of the machine. And so what I'm going to start doing is working horizontally here. We'll come on down here and I'm going to say year. It's 5-year life. What year should I start with?
0.
0, very good. Okay, and so they're telling us production balls. Do we produce any balls at time 0? No. Time 0 is when you basically start the whole thing. And remember, cash flows happen at the end of the period. So the production numbers that we're given here are happening over basically the year leading up to that time. And so there's nothing at time 0, but at time 1 we have 5,000. We have 8,000 for year 2, 12,000, 10,000, and then 6,000. Does that look right? Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. I should have done that already. I'm going to call it Baldwin example. Okay. Now they tell us the price of the bowling ball in the first year will be $20. Is that year 1 or year 0? Well, yes, year 1. So, BB price, year 1, $20. By the way, price is what you're charging your customer, cost is what you are paying. Does that make sense? So one person's price is another one's cost. So when you go to the store, they're selling to you at their price, that's your cost. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see, the Beddoes believes the price of bowling balls will increase at only 2% per year. BB price and growth rate. We're going to say 0.02, and then I'm going to go back and format that as a percentage. If you see me do anything on Excel that you can't figure out, let me know, and I'll talk you through it. Okay, and then they say the anticipated general inflation rate of 5%. Ah, no. There we go. Okay, conversely, the plastic used to produce bowling balls is rapidly becoming more expensive. What's the primary ingredient in plastic? You guys don't know? You live with this stuff every day and you don't know where it comes from? What if I were to tell you it was cat manure? Would that change your views on plastic? It's petroleum stuff, right? It's oil and natural gas is where we get the stuff to make plastics out of. And so that means as oil prices go up, so do plastic costs. What are oil prices doing right now? Going up, right? And so plastic costs will be up as well. Okay. Let's see. So, because of this, production cash outflows are expected to grow at 10% per year, but the first year production cost per ball will be $10. And so we've got unit cost of $10. Yeah, so it thinks it's being helpful. That's what's really sad. And then the cost growth rate. Oh, and by the way, what year is that? It's year one, right? And then they tell us, was it 10% that it grows at?
Yes.
0.10. Let me format that. Okay. And then they tell us that based on our taxable income, the appropriate incremental corporate tax rate is 34%. Let's get this down, and then we'll talk about why we have to choose the appropriate tax rate. Okay, remember back to chapter 2, we talked about average tax rate and the marginal tax rate. Remember that? The average tax rate is if we take total taxes divided by total taxable income. Boom, there you go. Marginal tax rate, does anyone remember the definition?
The tax rate you pay on your next dollar of earnings.
Yeah, the tax rate you're going to pay on that next dollar. And so when we're looking for incremental cash flows, we're assuming this project is on top of every other project. Should we be looking at our average tax rate or our marginal tax rate? Yeah, it's the marginal, right? Because it's going forward more money that we're going to be earning, so it's going to have to be at that higher marginal rate. In fact, if we're extraordinarily unlucky, part of the earnings will be in one bracket and another part will be in yet another bracket. Do you think I would do that to you on an exam? Not for chapter 8, no. You think I'm much more evil than I am. I'm only slightly evil. Okay. Okay, so I think we have enough information. We could do some fun stuff already. So I think we could go ahead and put bowling ball price here. And we're going to start by saying equal to, and then click on this cell. And of course, it just shows up down there. Now, how am I going to go about finding the price for year 2?
2%.
Yeah, so what have we got to multiply? Remember when we did D1 is equal to D0 times what? D1 is equal to D0 times? Yeah, times 1 plus the growth rate. And so we're going to do something similar here. We're going to say equal to the prior price, multiplied by, open parentheses, 1 plus, and then I'm going to click on this 2%. And I'm going to close that. And sure enough, that's correct. But watch what happens when I drag this thing over. By the way, do you guys know about dragging stuff over? Drag that over. Oh man, what's going on? Because it's dragging this thing out too, and it's reading this as 0, 0, 0, so it says, well, it stops growing after year 2. So how do we fix that? Well, we can go back here, and we can hit, I clicked right in the middle of that, and I'm going to hit F4. And F4 pops in those dollar signs that fixes the cell reference. It fixes the cell reference. And so now, when I copy these over, now it goes on and does what it should. I could have typed the dollar signs in myself, but I never can remember whether they go before or after. And whatever I guess is always wrong. And so I just remember F4. If you're using a Mac, it's a different key. Google it and find out, or learn what order the dollar signs need to go in. I would rather just go ahead and Google it. Okay, now another note here. In the book example, what they've done is they have rounded this to dollars and cents. So it would be $20.81, $21.22, and $21.65. I'm not going to worry about that, but I'm going to post this on Blackboard, and if you want to go out there and fiddle around with it and figure that out, feel free. Questions? Okay, now that I have annual production and the price per unit that I'm selling at, what can I calculate? Oh my goodness, this is just sad. This hip.
Sales right now?
Yeah, your sales, right? Your sales. We could call it revenue. And it's just going to be equal to the number of balls times the price per ball. I'm going to drag that on over. And so there is the amount of money this project is bringing in per year. Any problems so far? We haven't done anything magical or amazing here yet. Okay, now we could also do the same thing with cost. And our cost is up here at, right here, cost year one. And then how am I going, what should I do next? Say again?
Drag it over.
One more time.
Drag it over.
Drag it over. If I just dragged it over, let me show you what happens.
Oh, that's just the cost for year one.
Yeah, and it's cost rate for year one, and it doesn't have the cells fixed. So we got two problems. So how do I get the cost for year two? Oh, come on, it's just the same thing we did with price. Ms. Herdman, what do we do?
You do the $10
Uh-huh.
plus 1 wait, 1. Yeah. Okay.
Times
Yeah.
1 plus, and then we hook onto this growth rate here. But we know if we don't make a fixed cell reference out of this, what's going to happen? Same thing that happened above. So what button do I hit next? F4, very good. Pops in those dollar signs, close those parentheses, and now, Ms. Rafael, what should we do next?
Drag it over.
Drag it over, very good. Okay, so now we have our bowling ball costs. What can we calculate knowing this number and this number?
Cost.
Yeah. Now, this project does not mention anything about fixed costs. I'm going to go ahead and put variable costs here. By the way, do you guys know the difference between variable costs and fixed costs?
Yes.
What's the difference?
Variable costs aren't always the same, but a fixed cost is like always the same.
Oh, yes. In a very general way, you are absolutely right. Variable costs. Let's see. Oh, yes, go ahead.
As you change production, those change, but fixed costs stay the same.
Yeah. And so these costs that we're talking about that are per ball are variable costs. And she is absolutely right. Fixed costs stay the same, right? Okay, so these variable costs are varying with the production. And so what we're going to do, bless you, what we're going to do is say equal to the number of balls times that bowling ball costs. And then I'm going to drag that over. Okay. Now, I am going to put in something that is not in the project. It's just so, because I hope you guys will, and I know you won't, but I hope you'll take this with you and use it as a template if you ever find yourself in need of doing one of these analyses, and you'll want to put in your fixed costs here. And here's the weird thing. Must fixed costs stay the same every year throughout the project? No. What if we hired on a second supervisor in the second year of the project? Fixed costs go up. And so, but I'm going to pretend like they're just the same all the way across. And I'm going to put it in as 0 here. And so here we have fixed costs. And I'm just going to say equal to, then I'll just copy that over. Well, I should probably fix the cell reference. There we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so when you think about our income statement, we've got revenue at the top, and then we subtract our cost of goods sold, so that would be this variable cost here, minus our selling, general, and administrative expenses, which we don't have here. Let's see. And then we subtract typically what? Depreciation? And then that would give us earnings before interest and taxes. Does that make sense? Do we have any information yet on depreciation? No. So we're going to have to continue reading for a bit to see about that information. Okay, now it says net working capital, and they tell us what it is. So they're going to purchase raw material before production and sale, giving rise to investment in inventory. It's going to maintain cash as a buffer against unforeseen expenditures. We talked about this last time. And its credit sales will generate accounts receivable. Remember, this is a new product line. We're selling additional products. We're likely selling them on credit because that's how business around the world is done. And so therefore, they're telling us straight up front at year zero, we're going to have $10,000. So since we're working, remember, we're working for three things here. OCF, net capital spending, net working capital. This time we're working on net working capital. I'm going to make up a new set of years here. And we're going to call this net working capital. And they're telling us net working capital, hang on, insert. Net working capital year zero is 10,000, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then they tell us, what else do they tell us? After that, total net working capital for each subsequent year, and we know subsequent means following, will be 10% of sales. So NWC percent sales, and we would say it was for years 1 through 5, but what do we know about net working capital in year 5? It goes to 0, right? And so I'm just going to say 1 through 4 here. So, equal to that. So we've got that taken care of. And now we're going to say equal to our sales, or revenue, multiplied by, and I'm going to use this, where to go? Oh, I didn't put it in there. Shoot. 0.10. So equal to revenue times, and we're going to click on this, but what do I need to do right now? Yeah, I got to F4, that thing's not going to drag right. Now, it just turns out that 10% of 100,000 is 10,000, so don't get freaked out by that. But here's what happens. Oh, by the way, I shouldn't have done that because this last one is always 0, right? Okay, now that we have that information, we can actually figure something called the change in net working capital. If you had to guess what the change in net working capital, how we're going to calculate that, any ideas? How about the current period minus the prior period? Does that make sense? Okay. So, I'm going to use the fancy Greek symbol delta, which always tells us change in science and engineering. And I think it's 1 down. There it is. And then I'm going to show you a bug in Excel. Do you see what it did there? I made it huge. Why? I've been doing this example for over 15 years maybe. And in all that time, it keeps doing the same darn thing. And it says that it's the right size and everything, but it's not. But it's easily enough fixed. Okay, so net working capital change for the first, or for year 0, is just that 10,000 bucks. And then after that, it's equal to this year minus last year. I'm going to drag that over. And what we see here is as sales start to fall, then that working capital starts to fall, and then cash actually starts to flow out of net working capital back to the mothership. We talked about that last time, right? They're not just going to let us keep this money and throw a party. You got to send the money back to the mothership. Okay, and then at the very end, we've got a huge amount that goes back. Now, that's pretty cool because now we have one of the 3 things we were looking for cash flow from assets. Okay, let's continue and see what else we've got here. I think let's talk about depreciation next. In fact, what I want you to do is go to page 236 where we have table 8.3. And I want to talk about depreciation for a little bit. So far in this class, what we've talked about is straight line depreciation to zero. So if I've got a $100,000 asset over 5 years here, my depreciation every year would be $20,000. When we're doing our financial statements, strangely enough, when we're making up the ones for the investors, that's what we use. But when we're doing our taxes, we use this accelerated depreciation. Now you say, wait a minute, 2 sets of books, that sounds like something the mafia or truck drivers might do, right? You guys know about truck drivers and 2 sets of books? Why are they doing 2 sets of books? Yeah, they could drive longer. Oh, hey, look, I only drove 10 hours today on this book. Now I'm on my other. Okay, yeah, that's not legal. Don't do it. And I hope none of you end up having to drive a truck with an NVA, but, there could be worse things, right? Now, back to the story. You can have 2 sets of books, and it's perfectly legal. You've got the set of books that you're showing to the IRS. You've got the set of books that you're showing to the SEC. 2 agencies of the very same government, and they accept different sets of books. So, what we are going to do for purposes, and by the way, we're only interested in cash flows, right? And so we're going to look at what really generates our tax numbers, and that is using the accelerated depreciation, known as MACRS, Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System is what MACRS stands for, not that you need to remember that. And then there are these different classes for MACRS stuff. And if you flip on to page 238, you kind of go through them. They tell you that the 3-year class includes certain specialized short-lived property or short-lived tractor units, that's the front end of a diesel truck, semi-truck, and then racehorses over 2 years old. Does anyone know why racehorses have to be over 2 years old before they're considered an asset? I didn't know until I had a student that did racehorsing or horse racing, whatever it's called. And she told me that you can't race a horse until they're 2. And so up to that point, they're not an asset. They're just a big eating machine, right? So they're like pure cost. But then after you get to where you can race them, they become an asset. Okay, and then they get the 5-year class here, cars and trucks, computers. By the way, computers they used to cost a lot more, right? And so depreciating them made a lot more sense. And then it got to where we were replacing computers basically every year. And so this 5-year class, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. But guess what? We're back to where that almost makes sense again. And I also think it's funny here, they have calculators. If you had bought your calculator for business purposes, you could depreciate it over a 5-year period. Isn't that nutty? Okay. And then 7-year class includes all sorts of weird stuff. Office furniture, equipment, books, single-purpose agricultural structures. Let me tell you from being a farm kid what's the difference between a single-purpose and a multi-purpose agricultural structure. My grandfather had a milk barn, which is just where you milk the cows. That was the only thing that went on in there. That would be a single-purpose agricultural structure. But then he had other barns where he would store seed, and he would store hay, and he would also park his machinery in that. And so that would be a multiple-purpose farm building. So that would be in the 20-year class. Now, why is it done this way? I have no idea, except for probably the dairy farmers had a very powerful political lobby. Okay, 10 years, got vessels, barges, tugs. And by the way, how long do vessels, barges, and tugs really last? Much longer than 10 years. Just in case you're not familiar, I used to work on a boat that was like 30 years old, and it had been depreciated for apparently 20 years already. 15-year class has a lot of stuff, telephone distribution plants. And then we're on to 20 years. We already talked about farm buildings, sewer pipe, and other long-lived equipment. By the way, sewer pipes, I think we have some here in Springfield that are all like 100 years old. So they're going to be book value 0 long before their market value goes away. Okay, why do I tell you that? What you've got to do is figure out where your item falls. And if you can't figure out where your item falls and your tax accountant figure it out and your tax lawyer can't figure it out, then it goes into the 7-year category, because it's also a catch-all category, because anything that doesn't go anywhere else goes there. Now, what do they tell us in our problem? They tell us that this is a 5-year Macker's class depreciation that we're going to do. And so the way we use this table from table 8.3, is that we multiply these proportions or fractions by the historical cost. And so I'm going to take, for the 5-year, I'm going to take 0.2 times my historical cost of 100,000, and that's going to tell me that my depreciation for year 1 is 20,000. Now notice, it starts at year 1. There is no depreciation in year 0. I want you to notice a couple of things about these. In fact, just look at the 3-year one and tell me how many years of depreciation there are in the 3-year class. 4. Now tell me how many years of depreciation there are in the 5-year class. 6. And look at how many years there are in the 7-year class. 8. There will always be one more. And so this, and the next thing I want you to notice is that the first year is always smaller, then it gets big, and then it drops off from there. This is known, and you guys don't have to remember this, but this is how goofy your government is. It's known as the double declining balance with half-year convention. That's what this whole thing is based off of. Now, the final thing that I want you to recognize is to get your calculator and go ahead and add the numbers up for 3 years. Just add those numbers up and tell me what you get. Ms. Herdman, do you have it? Ms. Herdman, what did you get? 1. Did anyone else get 1? Yeah. And in fact, if we did, I'm not going to ask you to add the 20 years up, but if we did this, we would get, if we did this for all of them, they would all be 1, which means we are depreciating the entire value of that asset over its life. So this is to 0, right? This is taking it down to 0. However, in order for our current project, our project is only 5 years in length. But how many years of depreciation do we have there? 6. And so we are not going to be able to depreciate out the full value of our machine. At the end of its life, we'll still have 5.76% left. And so I think that's going to be $5,760. And so that's going to be what goes into this BV in our after-tax salvage value formula. Questions? Okay, so let's go ahead. Oh, let's ask while we're at it. We're going to have one other capital expenditure that we're going to put in here. Do you remember what our opportunity cost was? Yeah, the building. And the building, by the way, can you depreciate opportunity costs? No, you cannot depreciate opportunity costs. But we do need to know an assumption. And that assumption is we get the opportunity cost back at the end. We get the opportunity cost back at the end. Can anyone tell me why that makes sense? What can we do with the building after we're done with this project? Yeah, we can sell it. Now, prior to 2009, when I was doing this project, and I would say that we're going to use the same number, both places. It's just negative here, positive here. And students are like, wait a minute, real estate value always goes up. Now, what do you think they said after 2009? Oh, you can't do that because real estate value always goes down. Is there truth to either one of those statements? We know real estate's a risky asset. We don't know whether it's going to go up or down. So what do? Yeah, we just keep it the same. Does that make sense? And so that's our other assumption that we have to make, other than our net working capital going to zero at the end. Okay, so let's start working on this net working capital thing. I'm going to take these years, put it right here, because we're going to start a new thing here. I'm going to go ahead and put in my MACRS. And keep in mind that year 1 is where depreciation starts, not at year 0. And so it's 0.2, 0.32, 0.192, 0.1152, no, 0.1152, 0.1152, and then we have a 0.0576 that's over here. I'm just going to put it there just to remind us about it, but we're not actually going to be using it. And so now I'm going to go ahead and put in depreciation here. What is the only thing we're depreciating? We've really got only two things for capital investing here. The building and the bowling ball machine. Which one of those are depreciable? Yeah, the machine. And so what I want to do here is say this is equal to the MACRS amount times that initial cost of the bowling ball machine, which is right here. Now I want to go ahead and hit F4 to lock in that location because I'm going to pull that on over. There we go. Any questions so far? Okay, now I have book value. I've got the historical cost and I've got the depreciation information. I think I can go ahead and figure out the book value of the bowling ball machine. So at time 0, what's the book value? Yeah, it's 100,000. In fact, this is the only time market value and book value are the same for sure. It's the only time market value and book value are the same for sure. That's at time 0. Now, what about for year 1? Well, we say we take equal to the previous year's book value, and then we're going to subtract the current year's depreciation. And so when I subtract 20,000, it gives me 80,000. 80,000 minus 32,000 is 48,000. I'm just going to drag that on over. And as we predicted, we wind up with a book value of 5,760 here at the end. Why? Because there's 0.0576 or 5.76% of $100,000 left that we need to depreciate to get all the way to 0. Does that make sense? Okay, if this had been a 6-year project, we would have made it all the way down to 0. Okay, now we are going to use that depreciation a little later to get back and look at operating cash flow, but right now let's go ahead and knock out net capital spending. So here we are, EV, net capital spending. Now keep in mind it's spending, and so positive numbers are money going out, negative numbers are money coming in. Does that make sense? And we're going to take care of that later with the negative sign on NCS up here. Okay, so it's going to be equal to, and I can just go ahead and click there because after all it references that cell above. Is there any capital spending for the bowling ball machine in year 1? No. How about year 2? Mr. Rich, any capital spending year 2? No. Nope. How about year 3? Mr. Scarborough? No. Year 4, Mr. Zach? Oh, you're 5, Ms. Herdman. Oh, she says no, it's a swing and a miss. Yeah. By the way, this is the most common problem, is forgetting the after-tax salvage value. You gotta remember it. Now, remember, after-tax salvage value is money coming back. Money coming back in a world of spending is negative. And so we have to put a negative sign in front of this thing. So what I'm going to say is, oh bless you, equal, negative, open parentheses. Now we need the market value of that machine at the end, which is right here, minus the tax rate, which is here, multiplied by, open parentheses, the market value minus the book value. So we're going to do the market value again, minus, and where's the book value? It's right there where we calculated it. And then I'm going to put 2 parentheses in. Why do I have to put 2 parentheses? Yeah, so if you've got 2 of these, you got to have 2 of these. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to hit enter there, and that gives me negative $21,758.40. And then we have also the building. Building equal to, I'm going to roll up here, click on the building, and then, is there any net capital spending on the building in year 1? No. Any in year 2?
No.
Nope. Any in year 3?
No.
Any in year 4?
No.
Ms. Herdman, is there any in year 5? Yes! Remember, we get our opportunity costs back at the end. So we're going to say equal to negative, and just click on that first cell, and there we go. Does that make sense? Okay, now we can finally figure out our total net capital spending. By the way, this is building net capital spending. It's going to be equal to the bowling ball machine plus the building. Just going to drag that on over. And there we go. And I am going to make that bold because that is another one of the 3 things we've been looking for. So far we've got this one, we've got this one, and now we have enough information to go back and solve that one. What numbers were we missing earlier when we were trying to figure out operating cash flow? Depreciation. Depreciation. And so I'm actually going to say equal to, I'm just going to roll down here, oop, grab that, and then I'm just going to copy over. There we go, because I'm lazy. Now, if I take my revenue minus my costs, minus my depreciation, what should I get? If I take the revenue minus the variable cost, minus the fixed cost, minus the depreciation, I'll give you a hint, it's up here on the board. What should it give me?
Operating cash flows.
Going to give me EBIT, right? Okay, so I could also call it, I'm going to say EBIT or pre-tax income. Now, the reason EBIT and pre-tax are the same here is because there is no interest in the project. Remember, we said we are never going to include a cash flow for interest in our projects, and so that's why it doesn't come into play. That's why EBIT and pre-tax income are exactly the same here. Okay, so we say it's equal to revenue minus variable costs minus fixed costs minus depreciation. So there we go, that's our EBIT. Now, in order to get OCF, I need to know EBIT, which I already did. I need to know depreciation, which I already do. The last thing I need to know is taxes. Now, remember, since we're not subtracting income out, or interest out, all we have to do is multiply our EBIT times the pre-tax income, and that'll give us our EBIT times the tax rate, and that'll give us our taxes. Equal to, and I'm going to go ahead and hit F4 here, multiplied by this EBIT. And that's going to give us our taxes. Now I can finally calculate OCF. And it's equal to EBIT minus the taxes plus depreciation. And then I just copy that over. Okay, that is the final piece of the puzzle we were looking for. Now, I'll tell you one more thing you could have done. You could take EBIT minus taxes, and that would give you net income. And as long as there's no interest coming into play, if I give you net income and you add back depreciation, that also gives you the operating cash flow. But this way always works. The other way, well, actually, both of them have to make the assumption that we're not having any interest in here. But of course we aren't, because we do not include cash flows from interest in our capital budgeting projects. Okay, what do I have enough data to do now? Do I have OCF?
Yes.
Yeah. Do I have NCS? Do I have the change in net working capital?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got all that stuff. And so now I can come down here and I'm going to do another set of years. And I'm going to calculate CFFA equal to, by the way, OCF for year 0 is always how much? 0. Minus change in net working capital minus NCS, enter. And I'm just going to copy that over. And there we go. Okay, these are the numbers that we are going to use to compute net present value. Now, if you scoot on to table 8.4, what they do is instead of giving us one discount rate, they throw several at us so we can see the impact of changing rates on this. And we are going to set up our computer here to tell us net present value, and then we are going to check it with our calculator. But the first thing we're going to have to do is have our rate, and here they're telling us the rate is 0.04. I'm going to go ahead and format that as a percentage, a couple of decimal places, and then we will calculate the NPV. Now, as you might have suspected, there is a function in Excel that does NPV, but it does it incorrectly. I'm going to show you how you should be able to make a small correction and make it give you the answers that you want. Because the function in Excel, the NPV function, does not give you net present value. It gives you the present value of cash flows starting from time 1 at time 0. So all it's giving you is the present value of the subsequent cash flows. It's not taking the initial investment into account. So the way we're going to make this work is to say equal NPV, open parentheses. And it even tells you what you want. It says, where's my rate? So I'm going to click on rate, I'm going to hit the comma, and now it moves on to value 1. There's your clue. It didn't say value 0, did it? It says value 1. And so what we're going to do is we're going to grab these values starting here. And I could have put all those cells in there, C40, comma, D40, comma, E40, comma, F40, comma, G40, and it would have done this exact same thing. But it's a whole lot quicker to do it like this, with the colons or even just dragging like I did. Okay, and that's going to give me the present value of those cash flows, but in order to get NPV, what must I subtract out? Folks, we just hammered on this. Net present value is the present value of the cash flow subsequent to initial investment minus initial investment, right? Okay, now in this case, it's already negative. So I'm just going to say plus this right here, and that's going to give me my NPV. And I'm going to go ahead and put that like that. And our number came out to be $123,643. What did theirs come out to be? $2 off. Why is our answer $2 off? Remember back when I told you that we weren't going to round to dollars and cents for balls, price, and cost? That's it. That's the only reason that ours is not the same as theirs. Now, anytime, and of course we have the answer here, but in the real world, you're not going to have the answer. And so it's a good idea to go ahead and check your work. So I'm going to get my calculator out here, and we're going to check our work. CF, second, clear work. Get out of here. Okay, what should I put in for CF? Oh, come on. What should I put in for CF0?
-2.
Very good. 260,000. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. Negative. Enter. What's the next key that I hit? Yeah, the down. C01, what's it? Yeah, $39,800. Enter. Arrow down. What's F01 is 1. What's C02? 54,192. Very good, thank you. Enter. Arrow down, arrow down. What's C03?
66,845.8.
Yep. Very good, thank you. Enter. And if you see me type something wrong, let me know. C04, 59,895.70. Enter. Arrow down. And then finally, C05 is 224,650. Enter. Now, if I wanted to find the net present value, what do I do? NPV. And then I'm wanting to find it at 4%. I'm going to hit 4, enter. What do I do next? Arrow down, and then compute. Wow. We come out really, really close. And the reason we're not coming out exact is because probably there's a lot more to, let's see, what if I do this? Oh yeah, you see that? There's more junk out there. And if we went back and worked on that, we could probably get it closer. But you always want to check your spreadsheet using your calculator just to make sure. But then after that, you can start using your spreadsheet. By the way, the value of the spreadsheet, you end up doing a lot of projects over and over again. If you install one machine and it works out really well, chances are you might end up buying a second one. Well, all you got to do is get up that spreadsheet, and then you go up to that upper left-hand corner and you change the numbers that have changed as a result of the passage of time, and you're good to go. Does that make sense? Do I have to recheck my work with the calculator at that point? No, I verified it earlier. I shouldn't have to. Now, I'm paranoid. I used to work at a nuclear plant, so I always double check my calculations, right? And so I would tell you that maybe it's a good idea, but you don't have to. Questions? Okay, now there's what about IRR? It's much simpler. It's exactly what you would think it would be. Yep. And there we go, but it's not truly 16%, it's you see all that? Okay, now, what's the definition of IRR? It's the discount rate that does what? Makes NPV 0, right? And so let's go back up here and change this rate equal to IRR, and look what happens. It makes our NPV equal to 0. And so you could go out there and play with this, and you can see that they've got 15.67% is 0. They're trying to say that that's the IRR, but it's not for a couple of reasons. Number one, our rounding, lack of rounding, and number two is some rounding that they've done here. It wouldn't be exactly 15.67 anyway. Now, what does that mean? we would take this project as long as that discount rate was lower than 15.67%. But when it goes above that, what happens to the NPV? It goes negative, and we would reject it. Are there any questions? Okay, well, I am going to post this to Blackboard. You guys can play around with it, and I would tell you to save it onto a thumb drive and take it with you. Keep it with you always, just in case you end up having to do a net present value analysis. So last time, I know it's been a while, last time we did the Baldwin example, and I wrote up all those equations on the board. Do you think those equations are important? Yes. Do you think they should be on your note sheet? Yes. Do you think you should have them for your homework and practice? Absolutely. And also, there is a video where I work out some additional examples, some simpler examples, more like you're going to see on homework and exam. And so what I would recommend to you is to watch that video before you start doing your homework or practice for the capital budgeting. Okay, any questions? Okay, so now we're going to talk about inflation and capital budgeting. And it's really interesting because this time inflation, by the way, how much is inflation right now? Yeah, it's like 8.5%. And previously when I would talk about this, people were like, inflation, because it was less than 2%. And people were like, it's really not that big of a deal. Is it a big deal now? Absolutely. Anytime you fill your tank, you know it's a big deal, right? Okay, so how are we going to handle inflation with capital budgeting? Well, it turns out that, you remember if you think back to chapter 5 where we talked about real rates of return and nominal rates of return. The real rate of return talked about your ability to consume. So if you had a 10% real rate of return, you could consume 10% more goods and services over that time period. Whereas the nominal rate of return was purely about the number of dollars that were going into your pocket. And a 10% increase in the nominal return would not, or a 10% nominal return would not be a 10% real return unless there were absolutely no inflation. So there's your little reminder. And by the way, we had an equation that linked those two, the nominal and the real. What was it? Do you remember? Yeah, very good. The Fisher effect. Ms. Herdman, you are on top of your game today. Okay, and so it turns out we can have real and nominal cash flows too. When we're projecting these cash flows for capital budgeting, if we are purely looking at the number of dollars we're going to be receiving in the future, then those are nominal cash flows. But if all of our cash flows are in time $0, meaning we have adjusted them down to account for inflation, they are real cash flows. And here's what you need to know. This is the important thing. If I am given nominal cash flows, they must always be discounted with the nominal rate. If I am given real cash flows, they must always be discounted with the real rate. Let me say that again. If I have nominal cash flows, I always have to use the nominal rate for discounting them. If I have real cash flows, I use the real rate. Okay, now what are we going to see in reality? Well, you know all those rates that we see out in the market? Those are nominal rates because the market includes their demand for real return and their expectation of inflation in the rates that you see out there. So when you walk into the bank and you talk about a car loan and the interest rate is 7%, they're not expecting to get 7% real return. They're expecting to get something less than that because they're expecting inflation to be positive. And so all the rates that we see out there in the wild are nominal rates. And we tend to use nominal cash flow. So everything that I saw out in the real world, we were using nominal cash flows and discounting at a nominal rate. Now, if you're given real cash flows, of course you use the real rate. What if you just are unfortunately given a mix of the two. You've got 27 things that are in nominal, and you've got one thing that's in real. Do you convert the 27 nominals to real, or the one real to nominal? Yeah, the one, right? Okay, now, two reasons why you do that. Number one, you have 26 fewer opportunities to mess up. And number two, I'm lazy, right? I don't want to do all that work, and so I'm only going to do the one. So, whichever way gives you the fewer amount of changes, go that way. And of course, we mentioned using the Fisher effect to convert between nominal and real rates. And we can convert real cash flows to nominal cash flows by multiplying by 1 plus h to the t. Does anyone remember what h stands for?
Inflation.
Yeah, it's inflation. Why don't we use I? Yeah, people get confused and think it's interest. And Dr. Whitty, let's ask Ms. Hofstadter, what does Dr. Whitty use? Pi. Why do I not use pi? Yeah, people use 3.14. It's nuts, right? So that's why we're using h. So don't freak out when you see h. Now, you could also convert nominal cash flows to real by dividing by 1 plus h to the t. By the way, that to the t thing, inflation compounds just like interest. Inflation compounds just like interest. So that's why we're doing that. Okay, questions? Okay. Let's talk about cash flows. Yeah, okay. So let's talk about investments of unequal lives. So what we're doing here is let's say we're trying to replace a piece of equipment, and we're looking at two different options to replace them. If those two options provided the same benefit and had the same life, all we would have to do is look at the present value of the costs and choose the one with the lower present value of the cost, because after all, the benefit's the same, the life's the same. But what if they're going to provide us the same annual benefit, but one of them is going to last 5 years and the other one's going to last 3 years? Undoubtedly, the one that's going to last 3 years will have a lower present value of costs, but it's really not a fair comparison because it's going to last you 2 years less than the other item. And so we have to have some way to compare these. Now, remember, I'm saying all throughout this that the benefits are the same. So we're not going to consider revenue here. We're only looking at costs, and we always want lower costs. And so what we're going to do is compute something called the effective or equivalent annual cost. Either way, it's abbreviated EAC. And it boils down to this. What we're going to do is we're going to take all the costs for that item over its life, and we're going to scrunch it into one value at time 0. How could I put all these things into one value at time 0? Couldn't I just add the present values together of all those cash flows? Yeah, that brings it all to time 0. Oh, it's a bank ATM. I won't even look at how much she's pulling out. I have to wonder why people go to ATMs anymore. They have to get cash for what kind of transactions? I think she's making a drug deal. Okay, back to the story. So we're going to scrunch all this into time 0. And then step number 2 is we're going to blow it back out and make an annuity that has exactly the same present value and number of years that our machine has. So that our present value of costs are all scrunched back here to time 0. I'm going to find an annuity that has that same present value and then has the same number of years as the life of our machine. And when I do that, the payment that I'm going to calculate is the equivalent annual cost. And I'm going to do that for both, or I could do more than 2 options. I could do many options. But I'm going to accept the one with the lowest effective or equivalent annual cost. If I tell you right now you can get 2 identical apartments, one for $500 a month, one for $700 a month. I know they're rat traps at those prices. But which one would you choose? Yeah, the 500. So, and it's interesting when we get to look at these things and students are like, well, now which one do we choose? Always trust your cheap, greedy heart, right? Go with the lower equivalent annual cost. Questions so far? Okay. So here is our analysis. And let me tell you what the project is. Does anyone know what a country club is? What's a country club?
People like to hang out, play golf, usually socialize.
Okay, so people go there. By the way, are these poor people?
No.
No. In fact, the purpose of the country club is to allow rich people to get together without having to mix it up with poor people, right? Just putting it out there, right? Now, how do we keep poor people out of the country club?
Make it expensive.
Make it expensive, right? That's how we end. The more expensive you make it, the fewer poor people you get, right? Okay. Now, what are the activities? You've already mentioned golf.
Tennis.
Tennis, very good. And we're going to come back to that. Pool, swimming, right? And oh, that's a new one. Drinking is the one I was thinking of. Okay, so we're at the country club, and it turns out that just because people are rich doesn't mean that they necessarily have friends. And it takes two people to play tennis, right? At least two. But if you're a rich person but you're obnoxious and no one wants to hang out with you, the only way you can practice tennis is with one of these tennis ball throwing machines, right? Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. We've got two of these tennis ball throwing machines, A and B. Now, they both provide the same amount of benefit, and so we're not going to have to look at revenue. We're purely looking at costs. And machine A starts out, it costs us $500 to begin with. And then it costs us $120 per year over its entire 3-year life. And then at the end of year 3, the thing just dies and it's not worth anything. Machine B costs us a little more, $600. But two things. Number one, the maintenance costs per year are lower. And it lasts 1 more year. Now earlier I told you to trust your cheap, greedy heart. If you were just looking at this in the way of the normal consumer way, which one would you pick? A. Yeah, most people would say, oh, well, it's $100 less, I'm going to buy that. And it turns out that there will be some required returns that will make A a better choice. For example, when required returns are very high, the present values of its future cash flows get lower, lower, lower. And so at some point, it's good to just go ahead and buy the cheap one and then basically let it die early, right? Okay, so it turns out the required return is 10% on these. And we need to, first of all, take each of these and compress them into a time 0 number, which is going to be the sum of all the present values. And then we need to blow them back out to get an annuity. And so we're going to use our calculators to do that. So get your calculator out if you haven't already. CF, second, clear work. First thing I want to point out to you is that all these cash flows have the same sign. All these cash flows have the same sign. You are now instinctively trained to think that CF0 should be negative and everything else should be positive, but that's not the case here. And the reason is that these are all expenses. They are all costs. Now, typically you'd think, oh, well, those need to be negative. Hey, God bless you. Put a negative in front of all these things if you want. But two things. Number one, you got to remember to do it to all of them. And number two, I'm lazy. I don't like hitting the plus minus button over and over again, so I'm just going to do them all positive. Questions? Okay. So, what do you think we're going to put in for CF0? 500, very good. Get the calculator up here. 500. Then I gotta hit enter and arrow down. Now we're at C01. What should I put for C01? 120. Keep in mind, same sign, 20. Enter, arrow down. What should I do for F01? 3, very good. 3, enter. Now, how am I going to get all of those, get the present value of all those cash flows? What button should I hit next? NPV, very good. And we are told the required return is 10%, so I'm going to put in 10, enter, arrow down, and then I'm going to compute. I'm getting $798.42. Make sure that you're getting the same number. If not, we need to get you caught up and get you straightened out. Anybody not getting that number? Okay, now here's what I'm going to do. Now that is the present value of all those costs, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to store that just in case everything goes horribly, horribly wrong. And then we are going to find an annuity that has the same length of life as the machine, and we're going to look at that payment as being our equivalent annual cost. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say store 1, just in case everything goes horribly, horribly wrong. Then I'm going to hit clear once, twice, and now I've got that number up there by itself. And I'm going to hit second and future value. Why did I do that? What does that do?
Clear.
Yeah, it clears the time value of money keys, right? And so this number actually represents the present value of the cost. So I'm going to put present value. And for N, I'm going to put the number of years of life for the machine. What would N be? 3, very good. And then I'm going to put in 10 as my I per Y. And then I'm going to compute the payment. And so we can see that our equivalent annual cost for machine A is $321.06. Notice I didn't do the negative sign there. The negative sign is purely the sign convention of the TIBA 2+. If I had put in the present value as a negative, then this would have been a positive. That's all that's going on there because they're cash flows in opposite directions. Questions so far? Okay, now we got to do it for the other one. So, what button should I hit first? So CF, second clear work. What should I put in for machine B for CF0? 600. Enter. Arrow down. What should I put in for C01? 100. Enter. Arrow down. What should I put in for F01? 4. Very good. Thank you. Okay. Now, what button should I hit next? NPV. And what should I put in for I? 10. Very good. 10. Enter. What do I do next? Arrow down. And then what button do I hit? Compute. I'm getting $916 and roughly 99 cents. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to store that number just in case everything goes terribly wrong. And then I'm going to hit clear twice. Now, what should I do next? Yeah, second. Future value to clear TVM. Mr. Schraubman, what button are we going to hit next?
PV.
Oh, very good. PV. And let's see. Scarborough. What are we going to do for N here?
4.
4. Very good. And Mr. Boehm, what are we going to do for I per Y?
10%.
Very good. 10. I per Y. And what are we going to compute, Ms. Herdman? Payment. And that represents our equivalent annual cost. $289.28. Which one should we choose? Yeah, machine B. And you got to be careful thinking that you always need to choose the more expensive one with a longer life, because it all boils down to the discount rate. Once again, if the discount rate were high enough in this case, then machine A might be the way to go. Questions? Okay, now, I make that look easy. Do you think that you've got it now and you don't need to deal with that anymore? No. You gotta practice this thing like everything else. You gotta practice it. The biggest thing that trips students up is going ahead and putting a negative sign on that time zero cash flow, even though we've talked about not doing that. Okay, now we're on to something called the general decision to replace. And it turns out, you guys are fairly young, most of you, so you don't understand this yet, that everything wears out. Everything wears out. I'm going to ask Mr. Fell. Does everything wear out? Yeah. Hey, your car wears out, your air conditioner wears out, your body wears out, everything wears out. And it turns out that as things and bodies get older, you have to spend more and more money to maintain them. So I'll give you an example. My 2001 Nissan Sentra. I bought that car, and in the beginning, everything was great between us. We had a great relationship. When she had trouble, I took her to the dealership, and she was under warranty, and they would fix her, and they got all of the bugs worked out early in her life. And then we had some great years together, but then one day, she refused to start. She refused to start. Now, I'm generally a do-it-yourself kind of guy, but when I looked down deep into that engine bay and I saw the starter, and then I looked back, I got on the floor and I looked up at the starter, I said, there's no way, right? And so I had to have the tow truck come and take my Nissan to the dealership to get a new starter put on it. $600. Now, the next year, she had some suspension troubles. And then she had some transmission. And you know, it just goes on and on and on. My point to you is, as equipment gets older, it costs more and more to maintain. So at some point, it makes sense to get rid of the old equipment and get the new equipment. The question is when? When is the right time to get rid of your old equipment and get the new equipment? And that's what the general decision to replace is all about, to let you know when you should do that sort of stuff. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to have information on two machines. We're going to have information on the new replacement machine, and we're going to have information on the old machine, the one that you know and love. And we are going to use that information. First of all, we'll use the new information to calculate the equivalent annual cost of that new machine. And then we are going to look at the old machine year by year and determine when the cost to hold on to that machine for one more year will exceed the equivalent annual cost of the new machine. And when you're standing at year 3, or whatever year it is, and you can see that this is finally the year that the old machine is going to cost me more to hold on to than the equivalent annual cost of the new machine, we're going to go ahead and replace it and get the new machine, because we always want to pay less rather than more. Does that make sense? Okay. So the equivalent annual cost, we're going to do exactly the same way that we did in the last example. And once again here, this example assumes the revenue to be the same for both machines. Now, I'm going to tell you in reality that's typically not true. Newer machines have technological developments. They're typically more productive. They can produce, let's say we're making parts. They can produce more parts that are perhaps of higher quality, so you'd have lower scrap rate. But just for the sake of this argument, we are going to assume that the revenue is the same for both machines. Any questions? Okay, so here is our example. And I have to say this, this slide represents two different machines. This slide represents two different machines. That first bullet point is the new or replacement machine. The first bullet point is the new or replacement machine. Now, the table down below represents data about the old machine. The table down below represents the data about the old machine. So right above that word maintenance on the table, I want you to write old machine and circle it. This is data for the old machine. Okay. Now, the first thing we're going to do is figure out the equivalent annual cost for the new machine. So you got to get your calculator out. And I'm going to hit clear here. Then what's the next button I should hit?
CF.
Yep. CF, second. Clear work. What should I put in for CF0 for the replacement machine? 9,000. Actually, let me go ahead and read that to you. The replacement machine costs $9,000, requires $1,000 per year in maintenance, and has a life of 8 years. And it has a salvage value of $2,000 at the end of its life. So we're assuming that's the after-tax salvage value that we talked about previously. Okay, so what should I put in? Oh, so by the way, arrow down. What should I put in for C01?
1,000.
1,000, very good. Enter. Arrow down. What should I put in for F01?
80.
Everybody wants to say 8. Ms. Hofstetter, do you agree? It's 7. Why?
Because at the end of the 8th year, you're going to get that salvage value back.
Yeah, that last year's different. So we've got the $1,000 in all 8 years, but in that 8th year, we also have the salvage value. Now, keep in mind that that positive 1,000 we've been throwing out there is a cost, and so it's got the plus sign on it. This salvage value is money coming back to you. What sign should it have on it? Negative. What is plus 1,000 minus 2,000?
Negative 1,000.
Negative 1,000. And so that's, we're going to arrow down. Make sure I hit enter here. We're going to arrow down, and I'm going to put got to push it up a little bit there. Come on. 1,000, negative, enter. Does everyone understand why the last cash flow is different? Mr. Bohm, you don't? Okay. We know what it costs in year 0, right? And we know that in year 1 through 8, we're going to have 1,000 in maintenance. Years 1 through 7, that's the only number we have is the maintenance. In year 8, we have the 1,000 in maintenance, and we sell the machine, and we get $2,000 back. And so that last cash flow is different because it's positive 1,000 maintenance minus 2,000 in salvage value. And so that's why that last cash flow is minus 1,000, because there's two things going on there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, what button should I hit next? NPV. It says I equal, and they tell us the required return is 15%, so I'm going to put in 15 here, 15. Enter. What button should I hit next? Yeah, Mr. Bohm says arrow down. And then we hit compute. I'm getting $12,833.52. Is that matching up to what you get? Okay. Now, I'm going to do store 1, just in case everything goes horribly wrong. I'm going to hit clear twice, and then what should I do? I'll give you a hint. It starts with second.
Clear next.
Second, future value to get clear TVM. And then what should I do? Ms. Craven?
Is that present value?
Yeah, very good. Present value. Now, let's see. This next one is a little tough. I'm going to throw it out to Ms. Meek. Ms. Meek, what should we do for N? Yeah, very good. It's 8-year life, N. And then what should we do for I per Y? 15. I per Y. And now we can compute our equivalent annual cost. So the equivalent annual cost of the new machine is $2,859.95. So that's going to be the number that we judge against for when to replace the machine. Any year in which it's going to cost us more to hang on to the old machine than $2,859.95, we're going to go ahead and swap it out. If it's going to cost less than that to hold on to the new machine, we'll hold on to it for one more year and then we look again, but we'll do that here in a second. Okay, so that's what we need to know about the new machine. Now let's talk about the old machine. And there are a couple of things going on every year with the old machine. First of all, if we're talking about right now, I can sell that machine for $4,000. I can just go out right now and sell that machine for $4,000. However, if I hold on to it for one more year, the machine's only worth $2,500. If you've ever had a car that you were thinking about selling, you know the value, until very recently, weirdly, the value goes down every year, right? Now used cars are selling for more than new cars. Why is that?
So you can't get a car.
Say again?
You can't get a car.
You can't get a car, right? If you have an extra car, now's the time to sell. Okay, back to the story. So we know basically that vehicles, machines, they all become worth less over time unless there's some sort of weird thing going on. We also know the maintenance goes up every year. And so we've got maintenance. If we hold on to it for one more year, it's going to cost us $1,000. If we hold on it from time 1 to time 2, it's going to cost us $2,000 extra during that extra time period. If we hold on to it from time 2 to time 3, it's going to cost us another $3,000. And if we hold on to it from time 3 to time 4, it's going to cost us another $4,000. And so the first question we have to ask is, by the way, we're at time 0. We're going to hold on to this thing for one more year. How much does it cost us in maintenance to hold on to this machine for one more year?
$1,000.
Yeah, it's $1,000, right? Now, you might think, well, that's $1,000 is less than $2,859.95, but it would ignore something. Oh, by the way, we would get $2,500 if we sold the machine at the end of the year, wouldn't we? Does that make sense? But what are we leaving out? I'll give you a hint. Are you familiar with the term opportunity cost? What did we have to give up at time 0 in order to be able to hold the machine until time 1?
$4,000.
Yeah, we had to give up $4,000 at time 0. And so I could say plus $4,000 here as an additional cost, but is it just $4,000? No, it happened at time 0, 1 year ago. And so I have to multiply by 1 plus r to the t to get it up to the same time as these other cash flows. And t here happens to be 1, and r is 0.15. And so this is 4,000 times 1.15 gives us $4,600. And so when I add all this together, I got 1,000 plus 4,600 gives me 5,600 minus 2,500 tells me it's going to cost me 3,100 to hold on to this from time 0 to time 1. Should I replace the machine or keep it? What's the equivalent, Mr. Scarborough?
Oh, you should replace it,
Yeah, and what, you got the right answer now. Can you tell me why?
because the cost for this year is higher than the cost for the other machine.
Yeah, the cost to hold on to this thing for one more year is higher than the equivalent annual cost of the new machine. So we go ahead and replace the machine right now. Now, this is kind of anticlimactic because you're like, well, phew, we got all this other data, what would we do? Well, sometimes you don't manage to replace it right off the bat, right? And so what finance textbooks tell you to do is look at the next year. Let's do the next year. How much does it cost me in maintenance to hold on to this machine from time 1 to time 2? Ms. Rafael,
1,000.
how much?
1,000.
We're not going from 0 to 1, we're going from 1 to 2. Remember, cash flows happen at the end of the period. Mr. Wong, still not right. Ms. Hofstetter, it's 2,000. It's going to cost us an extra 2,000 in maintenance to hold on to it from time 1 to time 2. Okay, now we're going to say, actually, we're going to sell this thing at the end of the period. How much will we get for it? We're looking from time 1 to time 2. What's happening at time 2 with the salvage value? It's how much? 1,500. Minus 1,500. It's cash back into our hand, but we have an opportunity cost. To hold on to this thing from time 1 to time 2, what did I have to give up at time 1? Yeah, 2,500 bucks. But it's not just 2,500 because I could have invested it over that year at 15%. So what is 2,500 times 1.15?
2,875.
Very good, 2,875. And so 2,875, so that's 4,875 minus 1,500. I think this is 3,375. Is that right? Is that right? Very good, thank you. Okay, now, obviously, that's more than the equivalent annual cost of the new machine. So what your book says is you just keep going until you hit that time to replace the machine, and then you basically make a note, replace machine 236 3 years from now. And you walk away and you forget about it, and then 3 years from now, you just robotically go out and buy this machine and replace it. I'm going to tell you a better way. But first let me tell you where these numbers come from so you can understand why my way is better. Okay, so first of all, if you want to get, let's say, salvage value numbers, any ideas on what so let's use a car, for example. How would you find out today what your car is worth?
Kelly Blue Book.
Yeah, Kelly Blue Book or KBB.com. You go out there, you put your numbers in. I also basically, I'll take mine to the dealership and I say, what do you give me for it? And then after I have to correct the guy on what kind of car it is, then he thought my Ultima was a Sentra. Give me a freaking break, man. Okay, back to the story. I'm going to get this number from a dealer or from online. And that's exactly what you do with equipment. And so when I started playing this game back in 1994, the World Wide Web, as you know it today, did not exist. And so basically how I had to get these numbers was by calling my machine dealer, a guy named Rusty, which I thought was a great name for a guy that sold old rusty machines. Now, dealers, what do? They buy it and then they resell it, right? So he's got to make a profit. So I say, hey, Rusty, I've got this lathe. A lathe is a machine that makes round things. I've got this lathe, and I would like to know what you'd give me for it. And so it's really interesting to watch. Rusty gets down and he eyeballs the thing, and these things have big dials on them, and he rolls it back and forth to see if it's worn out. He does all sorts of tests on it. He turns it on, he listens, and he actually smells it. Did you know you can smell a bad machine? You know that ozone smell right before your dryer dies? Yeah, you can smell a bad machine. Anyway, so Rusty sniffs my machine, looks all around it, and says, hey, I give you $4,000. I say, good to go. then I say, well, wait a minute. What if I hold on to it for one more year, running at 2 shifts per day, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, cutting aluminum? And I have to tell him it's cutting aluminum because if it's cutting steel, the machine wears out faster because steel is harder to cut. And he says, well, that's kind of ballpark, but I think 2,500. And I say, okay, what if I held on to it for 2 more years? By the way, Rusty's kind of hanging himself out here, isn't he? Yeah. And so as I go along and I keep pushing Rusty, he keeps getting surlier and surlier. The numbers, of course, keep getting lower. And he says, when I ask him about year 4, he says, I wouldn't give you a damn thing for it. Right? Because by that time he's really mad. Okay, so that's where I would get those numbers. That's one way. The new way would be to go out and look online. And you can find machine dealers online. And it's really interesting when you work in manufacturing, you assume that your machine is unique and it's like your first love or whatever, it's unique and it's never going to be the same again. But when you go out and look on the internet, you find out there are 72 more just like it that are out there for sale. And so you go out there and you find one that's the same age as yours, same condition as yours, and you get the price. Now, by the way, that's the dealer's price they're selling at, so I would take about 80% of that to get the money that you could get out of yours. Now, how would you find out the year 1 value? You go look for one that's 1 year older than yours. You take 80% of that, that gives you your year 1 value. And you go find one that's 2 years older than yours. You take 80% of that, that's your 2-year value. You see how it works? Okay, now, on the maintenance, there are a couple of ways to get the maintenance. Number 1, if you're in a large organization, you should have a maintenance department, and a professional maintenance department keeps records, so there will be historical record, and you might just assume that you could just use that to come up with a trend, and you can see that's very clearly what's going on here. We're going from 1,000 to 4,000 over 4 years. But your maintenance people will know something else that the trend won't show them. And that is that there are some things that have to be done every so many years, and they cost a lot of money. For example, airliners have to be basically stripped down, inspected, and rebuilt every, I think it's 6 or 7 years. And so you might be looking at an airliner, and you've been looking at the trend over 5 years, and you assume that the maintenance is just going to keep going like that. It's not. There's going to be a huge whoop spike in one of those years. Okay, so I would talk to my maintenance guy, Tom, and we would talk about machine 236. And he would say, yeah, you know, your maintenance is going up this much every year. He says, but something you need to know. I'm like, what is that? He says, this machine's going to need a new thrust bearing next year. Now, do I even have to know what a thrust bearing is? I do, but I don't have to know, right? So what do I ask? How much is that going to cost me? He says, $30,000 bucks. And then I also ask him how many days the machine's going to be down because I got to plan production, right? But now I know that in that year, in addition to the growing regular maintenance costs, I'm going to have an additional $30,000. Now here's the problem. The numbers that you get out of the maintenance department probably are not going to be correct for one reason. What do maintenance people prefer? Old machines or new machines? Everyone assumes new, but keep in mind, Mr. Strotman, what is the job of the maintenance person?
Fix stuff.
Fix stuff. What's more likely to break? Old stuff, new stuff? Old stuff. And if you're the only mechanic who can fix this machine, it's also job security. We had this one guy. He was the only guy who could fix machines 236 and 237. They were ancient. And he would basically, you'd walk around and you'd ask him for something, and he'd basically flip you off. And there was nothing we could do about it because he was the only guy that knew how to replace machines 236 and 237. I'll never forget the look on his face the day we wheeled out machines 236 and 237 and wheeled in the new ones, the new Nagatas that were totally different, and he now no longer had an advantage. Do you think he flipped us off anymore after that? No, and he went out with the next round of layoffs. Back to the story. Maintenance people are going to underestimate maintenance costs on the old machine because they want you to hold on to it longer. By the way, maintenance people a lot of times will spot problems with machines. Remember, we talked about being able to hear and smell? Well, they'll spot a machine problem. Now, by the way, when do you think they're more likely to spot a problem? 8:30 in the morning on Monday or 4:30 in the afternoon on Friday? Oh, I don't think so. If you find it at 8:30 on Monday morning, you're going to be fixing that machine on straight time. Do you guys know the difference between straight time and overtime? Overtime is 50%, right? 50% more. And so if I report it on Monday, I may spend all week fixing that machine for my measly old $20 an hour, right? But if I can wait till 4:30 on Friday, they'll have me working over the weekend to fix it, and I can do it for $30 an hour. Do you think people are really like that? People are scumbags. I used to work in a nuclear power plant, and they let engineers shift. So I would come in at 7 to get out at 4. And the reason that I did that is because at 4:30 on Friday afternoon, my computer died on me. At 4:30 on Friday afternoon, there would always be some crap that went wrong. I talked too long, that's obvious. Okay. There would always be some crap that goes wrong. Why? Because the operators, the mechanics, the electricians, they all were hourly. Now I was salary. And by the way, nuclear plants are ran by Navy people. That's where the trained personnel for nuclear plants come from, is the Navy. And so whenever there's a problem, what do they say? All hands on deck, right? I'm not kidding. All hands on deck. Now, that means if you're there, you got to jump on this problem. But if you're not there, you don't have to jump. So why am I always getting out at 4 o'clock on Friday? Because I don't want to be there when the all hands on deck call goes out at 4:30 because I'm not getting paid any extra to be there. It's sad. I'm not kidding. This is real human scumbag behavior, both on my part and on theirs. Okay, now, so maintenance people are going to underestimate maintenance costs. We can go to a different group of people. We can go to a group of people called engineers. Engineers can read the stuff on the machine, the manuals. They can know when that big thrust bearing is going to have to be replaced. They can look at the historical data from maintenance, so you may have to twist the maintenance people's arms to get that data. But they could also come up with a number. But here's what you need to know about engineers. Do they like new machines or old machines? New machines. You guys know about new car smell? Oh man, there is such a thing as new machine smell. When that machine comes in, it's nothing but machine oil. And then after about 3 weeks of running, it smells like dirty socks and rotten eggs. So, new machine smell, and of course, it's a new gadget to play with. Engineers love that kind of stuff, right? You can see my gadget that I'm playing with here. So we would always try to overestimate maintenance costs so we could get the new machine sooner. So you've got two groups of scumbags here giving you two sets of numbers. What should you do? Average them. Average them to get your maintenance situation there. Does that make sense? Okay, questions? That is the end of chapter 8.